Hello and welcome back to All Things Money. I'm your host, David Blain. We thank you for joining us today, either on the air or 94.1 WNBU FM or Cable TV 10 in New Bern. We thank you for joining us. If you have any comments or questions on the show, as always, please feel free to contact us. Our phone number is 252-633-0107. Our email is allthingsmoney@dlblain.com. And you can also visit us on the web at www.dlblain.com. There you'll find information about myself, my firm, as well as archived copies of the show. If you missed a segment or an entire day, we encourage you to go on the web and catch up on your listening. Okay, so during the first segment, we were talking a little bit about the downgrade the negative credit watch put on the U.S. debt by Standard & Poor's. We're going to circle back in a minute and talk a little bit more about the dollar. A great article that was done by Seth Lipsky, the editor of the New York Sun. We'll talk about that. But before we do, I thought I'd segue into this article that appeared about inflation a couple of days ago from CNBC. And it's the headline is "Inflation Actually Near 10% Using an Older Measure." And this is from a newsletter called the Shadow Government Statistics newsletter. And inflation is one of those things that, like some other topics, is very hard to define inflation. It has a lot of different measures, a lot of way of measuring it, a lot of way of observing it. It's one of those things it's hard to put your finger on, but when you feel it in your pocketbook, you know it's there. And so this article talks about how the way the measurement of inflation has changed over the years and how the statistics put out by the government may be currently understating inflation. So let's just kind of review for a minute. There's two types of inflation, and in the strictest sense, inflation is an overall rise in the general prices of an economy. So when you have gasoline rising in price, to $4 a gallon, but the overall price level in the economy is not going up as fast as gasoline, you don't have, strictly speaking, inflation. What you have is price inflation on gas, but you don't have overall economic inflation. So there's two types of inflation. One is monetary inflation, which is an increase in the money supply. And this, to me, is one of the most dangerous types of inflation. It's when there's way too much money chasing too few goods, and it's simply from printing too much money. The second type of inflation is what I just described as price inflation. Price inflation is probably what you experience when you go to the gas pump or the grocery store. Is the price of items are actually going up. But they're two different and distinct things: monetary inflation and price inflation. And over the long term, it's generally felt that inflation is determined by monetary inflation or changes in the money supply. When you look at, inflation over long periods of time, since the 1920s or 30s or 40s, that what you're seeing is a general rise in the money supply. Over the short and intermediate term, price inflation is largely determined by supply and demand. Simply, there's more people trying to purchase gas than gas is available, and so the price goes up. There's more people trying to buy corn than corn is available, so the price of bread goes up, or wheat bread, because they're using corn to make ethanol. They're shipping corn overseas. The demand for food, and so the prices rise. In other things such as the iPad or telephones or flat screen TVs, these type of things are declining. The price of homes declining. And so what we see price inflation today, but we don't have wholesale rise in price in everything. And so there's an important distinction. But anyway, when you're looking at statistics, you have to understand what you're looking at. A lot of the statistics that come out exclude food and gas prices because they're so volatile. A lot of times they're taken out. So anyway, this back to the story. If we look at inflation using the methodologies that were in place before 1980, this shadow government statistic says that inflation hit 9.6% in February. The Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the people that develop the inflation data and keep track of it, they periodically change the way they compute inflation, both in terms of what is included in this basket of goods. They try to create a typical basket of goods that consumers buy. And so something that was in this basket, 20 years ago may not be in it today. Example of things that are in it today that maybe weren't 20 years ago, is cell phone bills and, things like that. As technology changes and the tastes of consumers change, they change what goes in the basket. They also change the methodology of how it's computed. And one of the big things is they have some sort of adjustment for improvement in quality. And so if you look at a car, that was produced, the Model T Ford, and you look at today, a Ford, I don't know what Ford makes, a Ford Focus, you see that there's been a tremendous price increase between a Model T and a Ford Focus. You also see that the Ford Focus is probably a little bit higher quality car than the Model T, and so the statistics have to take into account this adjustment in quality and productivity. Well, we're coming up on a break here. I'll finish up with this discussion about what is the true measure of inflation when we come back. So, for All Things Money, I'm your host, David Blain, and we'll be right back after a few short messages.